It's been a quiet week here in Detroit, my hometown, the Motor City. The good kind of quiet, the kind that settles in when the weather finally turns and nobody's in any hurry to be indoors. Spring came on warm this week, real warm, windows open at night warm, and summer is right there now, leaning on the door. I've kept the air conditioning off and the windows open, though I'll admit, one hot afternoon I broke down and ran it a little while. People are out. My neighbor across the way has been walking his little white dog twice when once would do. And the work goes on the way it always has here because somebody's got to make the thing that moves. Out in Dearborn and Warren and over in Hamtramck, the line is running. The tool and die folks are cutting steel to 1/1000th of an inch, and somewhere an engineer is bent over a screen, drawing next year's car. Me? I work from home. I run mediation and arbitration hearings over Zoom. Two people who can't stand each other in little boxes on a screen, and my job is to sit in the middle and find the third thing they can both live with. I went down to the county farmers market and picked out some annuals for the yard, wax begonias, marigolds, and dragon wing begonias. The fella swore they'd take the afternoon sun. I pulled weeds, pruned the bushes, and put down weed and feed on the lawn, and the flexible hose out back picked this week to start leaking like crazy, so it got replaced too. In this community, folks tend their yards like they're being judged, deadheading and watering at dawn, and I am trying to keep up, losing, but gracefully. I ran into Dave Williams on the Paint Creek Trail. Now, Dave's a runner, a real one, and he's got it in his head that someday he might head out to Arizona and run a thing called the Comedown 250, 250 miles across the desert and up into the mountains. We got to talking about it, the heat, the cutoffs, the climbing, and we went on a while because it's a fine thing to watch two men get worked up about something hard. I hope Dave does it. He'll do well. One of my neighbors knocked Saturday to say her grandson was getting married that very afternoon, with the reception out at Addison Oaks, the old Buhl estate. There's a story there, like there always is. Back in 1927, a Detroit industrialist named Lawrence Buhl and his wife Cora bought a stretch of land up in the north end of the county and had a 27-room English Tudor manor built, a summer place, somewhere to get away from the noise and the smoke of the city. The county took it over at the end of the 60s and made it a park, and now that grand old escape from Detroit is where regular folks throw their weddings, which seems about right to me. Anyway, she had grandkids driving in from out of town, and what they wanted to do, of all things, was play pickleball. So I lent her a paddle and a sack of balls. This week I also finally connected with Karen Bonet-Natraj. We'd both been out at Cocodona this spring, two specks somewhere in that long line across Arizona, and somehow never crossed paths until now. So this was the conversation we'd been meaning to have. If you don't know Karen, you should. Her running resume is the kind that makes you sit up straight. But the one that stays with me is this. She crossed the finish line at Western States, 100 miles through the Sierra, one of the oldest and hardest races in the sport, with 9 seconds to spare before the final cutoff. 9 seconds. After 100 miles and the better part of 30 hours. Sit with that a second. People hear ultra-running and picture the fast ones up front. But the truest version of this whole thing is somebody emptying the tank for 30 hours to beat a clock by 9 seconds. That's not speed, that's refusing to quit, which, if you've been listening, is about the only kind of running I know how to talk about. And that was the week here, quiet. The flowers are in. Dave's got his mountain. Somebody's grandson got married. And the line's still running. Me, I kept it quiet too this week. Easy miles, mostly rest. The body's still mending from the last long one, which, if you've been following along, was exactly the plan. There's a mountain of my own waiting out west come July, but that's later in the show. For now, it's just spring in Detroit, and that's plenty. And that's the news from Detroit, where the coffee's strong, the neighbors are nosy, and nobody ever quits. Now let's get into the work. Week 23 of year 2026. The Huron 100 is behind me. That was last weekend, June 6th and 7th. And the next start line on the calendar is the Summit 200 on July 27th at altitude. So this week had exactly one job: recover. For the record, here's what the body was recovering from. The Huron 100 came in at 99.3 miles, just under 160 kilometers in 29 hours and 41 minutes elapsed, about 25 and a half hours of that moving. Somewhere around 2,400 meters of climbing, average heart rate 117. The plan had targeted 28 hours. I came in a little over that on a humid June course, and I finished. That's the number that matters. If you've got questions about recovering from a 100-miler or about pointing one race at the next, leave them in the comments. I read them, and I'll answer. A like and a subscribe helps the channel. Here's the weekly snapshot. The facts. 4 runs this week, 15.9 kilometers of running, 182 meters of climbing, 2 hours and 11 minutes on my feet. Add 2 bike rides totaling 16 kilometers and 2 hours of pickleball on Thursday. 3 full rest days, Sunday, Monday, and Friday. Planned versus executed is the interesting part of this week. The plan prescribed walking, 13 kilometers of it across the week, short walks, full rest days, 1 easy run-walk on Saturday. What I actually did was run those distances, easy, controlled, but running. 15.9 instead of 13, with more than double the prescribed climb. What worked? The body held up. The joint screening the plan asked for on Thursday came back clean, no tendon hotspots. What I'd flag? I ran when the plan said walk. The legs felt good, but felt good 1 week after 100 miles is exactly when a person gets into trouble. I'll come back to that. The day-by-day highlights. Monday, plan called for a 1-kilometer walk. I took the full day off instead. Day 2, post-race rest was the right call. Tuesday, Paint Creek Trail at Dutton Road. The plan wanted a 45-minute walk over 3 kilometers. I ran 4.01 kilometers in 33 minutes, 2 meters of climb. That's how flat that trail is. First run since Huron, and the legs remembered how. Wednesday, the plan said full rest. I made it a bike to run instead, 7.9 kilometers out to the Gallagher Road trailhead, a 2-kilometer run, then 8.1 kilometers back on the bike. Along that stretch, the Detroit Institute of Arts displays work on the trail. Wednesday, it was a degas, horses moving toward distant hills. Thursday, 4.54 kilometers on the Oakland University campus past Meadowbrook Hall, 57 meters of climbing in about 35 minutes against a planned hour of walking. That's ground I trained on 3 days a week with a group of men back in the 90s. Then 2 hours of pickleball at the OPC in the afternoon. Saturday, Bald Mountain Recreation Area, 7 in the morning. This was the one day my run matched the plan. An easy 5-kilometer run walk, 5.33 kilometers, 119 meters of vert, 45 minutes, the trail entirely to myself. The longest and best effort of the week right up until I lost the drone, which clipped the brush over a swampy stretch and dropped straight into the water. Still down there, as far as I know. I want to spend a minute on something heavier this week because it matters, especially for those of us doing this in our 50s and beyond. First, let me be clear about what this is and what it isn't. I am not a medical doctor, and I'm not a cardiologist. Nothing I'm about to say is medical advice. I'm an endurance athlete who pays attention to the health questions that affect endurance athletes. And this week, there's an important article worth talking about. I'll put a link to it in the show notes so you can read the whole thing yourself. I'm simply commenting on it. For my own part, I've seen a board-certified cardiologist, Dr. Joel Kahn, for many years now, for the specific purpose of keeping my heart healthy, on top of regular annual visits with my primary care physician. I'll leave a link to Dr. Kahn in the show notes as well. Dr. Kahn has a great podcast, and I encourage you to check it out. So you know the chair I'm sitting in, a patient and an athlete, not a physician. Now, let me start where the evidence starts. Exercise is still one of the best things any of us can do for long-term health. Hold on to that, because everything after it is nuance, not a reason to stop. Last week, reported June 10th, there was a new review in the British Medical Journal looking at extreme endurance running and the heart. The short version, the changes all this training writes onto the heart, aren't one size fits all. They vary by age, by sex, by how long and how hard you've been at it. And for older, high-volume athletes, screening ought to be individual, not assumed. Here's the concern stated plainly. In a small subset of older endurance athletes, people who've put in decades of big miles, the heart can adapt in ways that look different from what you see in younger runners, and a few of those changes can raise the risk of an abnormal rhythm. Researchers are watching 3 things. The first is atrial fibrillation, AFib, the most common rhythm problem in veteran endurance athletes. After years of training, the upper chambers of the heart can enlarge, and that can surface as a racing or fluttering heartbeat, an irregular beat, unexpected fatigue, or a drop-off in performance. And here's the strange part. Older endurance athletes get AFib at a higher rate than non-athletes, not lower. The second is scarring in the heart muscle, myocardial fibrosis, and it's the one drawing the most attention right now. Some long-term endurance athletes develop small patches of scar tissue, and nobody fully agrees on why. Maybe the decades of load, maybe genetics, maybe an old viral infection or a bout of myocarditis nobody caught, maybe ordinary coronary disease. The worry is that scar tissue can interfere with the heart's electrical signals. The third is the one I would underline, coronary artery disease. It can hide behind fitness. It is awfully tempting to think, I can run 200 miles, so my heart must be perfect. But fitness doesn't erase plaque or calcium in the arteries or coronary disease. Some very fit older athletes turn out to carry significant coronary calcium anyway. So what do you do with that? You learn the signals that should never be brushed off, especially if they show up during exercise. Palpitations, a fluttering or skipping heartbeat, shortness of breath you can't explain, chest pressure, lightheadedness, near fainting, or a sudden unexplained drop in performance. If any of those visit you on the run, that's a conversation with a doctor, not a thing to push through. The screening side is straightforward, the kind of thing sports cardiologists suggest for veteran ultra-athletes: an annual cardiology check, a stress test and an echocardiogram from time to time, staying aggressive about cholesterol and blood pressure, getting any new rhythm symptom looked at, and wearing a monitor for a stretch, a Holter, or a Zio patch if something's flickering. For those who already know they've got plaque, the focus shifts off the running itself and onto managing the ordinary risk factors. Now the good news, because it's real. The evidence still lands firmly on the side of endurance exercise. The typical veteran ultra-runner lives longer than their sedentary peers, dies less often from heart disease, carries better metabolic health, and keeps their independence later in life. The question the doctors are actually asking isn't, should older athletes stop running ultras? It's, how do older athletes keep running ultras safely for decades? For me, that means staying in close contact with my cardiologist about the quiet stuff. AFib, I can't feel. Rhythms that only show up under load. Any creep in coronary disease. Any sign of that scarring. And as it happens, I was just in to see him, which is right where this week's gear comes in. The piece of gear that mattered most this week isn't a shoe or a vest. It's an Omron blood pressure monitor, and it had been sitting unused in a drawer until that visit. At the checkup, my annual heart exam, Dr. Khan took my blood pressure the way he always does, and then asked me a plain question. Did I have a monitor at home? And was I checking my pressure regularly? I gave him the honest answer. I've got one, but I don't use it. He encouraged me to start, so I am. The cuff is out on the kitchen counter now, and I spend a couple of quiet minutes every morning taking my own pressure before the day gets going. And this week, there is fresh research behind that nudge. A study published Friday in the European Heart Journal, Digital Health, out of Edinburgh Napier University and the University of Edinburgh, followed nearly 450,000 people in Scotland living with high blood pressure between 2019 and 2022. About 9,500 of them used a service, checking their own pressure and sending the numbers straight to a doctor, while everyone else was followed the usual way through their local GP. The whole thing was funded by the British Heart Foundation. What they found? The folks monitoring at home brought their pressure down within 3 months and held it there for a year. And more to the point, they landed in the hospital less often and died less often from heart-related causes. The British Heart Foundation's research director, Professor James Leiper, called it more evidence that putting the tools in people's own hands, check your pressure, send it in, is an efficient way to get blood pressure under control, and called that drop in serious heart events encouraging. For a guy who asks his heart to beat for 30 hours straight across a mountain range, 2 minutes of mourning with a cuff feels like a fair trade. Here's one thought on the race ahead. Here's the thing about Summit. It's not Huron, and it's not Cocodona. It's a 200 at altitude, and altitude doesn't care how fit you arrive. It taxes everyone, which makes recovery right now more important than fitness right now. The temptation 1 week out from a 100-mile finish is to test the legs, to confirm the engine still runs. I gave in to a little of that this week. The plan said walk, and I ran. The discipline for the next stretch is the opposite. Let recovery finish before I ask for climbing and arrive at the foot of that mountain in July healthy rather than sharp. Durability gets you up high, sharpness doesn't. Next week, the plan steps volume back up, carefully. It's roughly 40 kilometers across the week, still all aerobic, an easy 6 on Monday, 8 on Wednesday, and then the first real touch of climbing returns, 10 kilometers over gentle hills on Thursday, and an easy 14 with about 300 meters of vert on Saturday, power hiking the steep stuff. The one thing I'll protect is restraint on the climbs. First touch means first touch. Power hike. Keep it aerobic. No heroics. The vert work that matters for Summit comes later. Next week is just opening the door. That's the work for this week. Before I go, 2 questions for the comments. First, how do you handle the come down after a big race? That stretch where the body's mending, but the head doesn't quite know what to do with itself. And second, if you've ever trained for an altitude race while living down at sea level, like I do here in Michigan, what actually worked? I read everything you leave down there, and I'll respond. If you're new here, the full series is on the channel. Start wherever you like. And if the journey feels like something worth following, hit like and subscribe. There's more to come. Week 24 of year 2026 is already waiting, and I'll see you there. I'm Paul James Johnson. Keep your feet on the trail and keep reaching for the summit.